Hello everyone! You liked my previous video about tips on using curves in geometry nodes so much. That's why I decided to put together even more helpful tips for you. And this time I ended up with so much material that I've decided to divide it into 2 separate videos. And that's not all. I'm already gathering content for upcoming videos, and I truly hope you'll support me as there's still a lot more material to share. So please subscribe, hit the like button, leave your comments, and download my free projects from my Gumroad. All of this truly motivates me to dedicate more of my time to this channel. Well, let's get started. So the first section is about tips related to the curve to mesh node. I think everyone knows that if you input a regular line into the first input of the node and something like a circle or square into the second, you get something like a pipe with a cross section. But few people know that you can swap these inputs and then you get something more interesting. In order for this to operate correctly, we will need to displace our particular curve that will subsequently feed into the second stage. We need to shift it so that it starts at the origin and continues towards the positive x-axis. In that case, our internal shape will exactly match the radius. If we set this value to 1 here, then the radius will be exactly 1. For the moment, let's go back. Additionally, you can incorporate rotation into this. And of course, you can set the rotation relative to something. Factor of the curve will get something like a flower. And we can here establish these curves however we want. The next feature is that in curve profile, we are able to input several different curves. Let's say, for example, I've used a circle and a rectangle, and the result that we obtain is that's the geometry. We can present another geometry. One can also add here. Random for different circles, and let's say make them a little bigger. Here, everything depends only on your imagination. Also, this can be combined with this option, and of course then, here it will be like this. And the next trick is that instead of splines, we can provide points here. But before that, we need to turn them into curve points. This is the way we do it, and we end up with lines. Because there's a spread along the z-axis, they don't all begin and continue from the exact same point. But remember, these are no longer actual curves. So if we want to keep working with them as curves and use this method to duplicate curves, then we need to convert them back into curves. The next feature is that we can use a regular line with a standard curve, but we only need to feed a spline into the factor with some specific settings by passing it through a node. We could fashion the arrow in this manner. We could also create a pitcher or perhaps a simple ordinary drinking bowl or a plate. Also, bear in mind that the factor here can be increased beyond 1. And the next section of features concerns the Fillet curve node. In many nodes that somehow change the geometry, there is a selection input, but the Fillet curve node does not have that input. So how can we make it so that we round off more here, perhaps less here, or not round at all? For this, we'll need this particular node set up. Note that while it's 0 here, we have the quantity. Number of points is 6. As soon as we change this parameter to be greater than 0, the number of points becomes 8. This means it does not create additional points where the radius is 0. How it's structured, this viewer node, I'll explain a bit later, most likely in the second video. The next thing to consider, if we still prefer not to use Bezier curves, but rather standard curves, and we want our bevels were as if they were concave squares. How do you do it? We use it the same way. Our fillet curve, as in the previous case, but we're not using Bezier, but a standard polygonal one. And in this process, we are shifting these particular points along their normal vector by precisely the same numerical value as that of the fillet curve, which is then multiplied by -1. And if instead of -1 we substitute this value, then our right angles will remain right. How to get this number? Several ways to get it. And all of these methods, you can learn about it right here. Here, for instance, if you simply input a number, then it will be a number like this. And the following features concern the fill curve node. In the source data, we have a number of curves that are intersecting. If we simply run this through the fill curve function, then they will have an intersection option, which is commonly referred to as exclusion in regular editors. Well, what if we don't want everything to intersect like this, and each curve to be combined with others according to some rules, so that they are grouped somehow? For this we have the group ID input, and so right now it is one geometry. We see if we input two different numbers here, then it means that the curves are already being processed according to their respective groups. So let's go ahead and divide them into 3 groups. At 4, and each curve if it is in its group. But what if we want that? Did we manage to get these missing pieces? How do we go about doing that? First, we'll take a very large circle and a square, which will be about 10 times larger than our geometry in diameter. We then add our curves here and fill it in. We end up with an inverted result, but there are massive planes, which can be removed either by their area or by their position. And the result is the inverse form, if we now combine these elements. So we'll end up with 2 geometries like these. Additionally, if we choose edge instead of face here, we will still have these edges left. The next feature concerning fillet curve is about intersections. Here we have, these are the curves. This results in such a mesh, but how do we get rid of this thing when we need the curve to be inside our shape? For this very purpose, you can use the raycast node. We take a curve separately, which touches the area inside where we want to leave our mesh, fill it separately, shift it down a bit, and use the raycast node. So, this is the kind of selection that we're getting. It's important to note that it also works with more complex geometry. And if we will move it, then everything will work correctly. There are times when we still encounter issues, and in such situations, we just need to increase the resampling of our curve. Based on this selection, we remove everything unnecessary. And what if we now want convert back into a curve exactly the part of the curve that intersected? That is, we need curve boolean is needed. Here the geometry proximity node will help us. And in this way, we are able to obtain a result from these particular curves. We use 2 curves to highlight exactly the section we need. If you activate the not node here, then we will have the opposite part of this highlighted portion. So, there were so many tips that I decided to split this video into 2 parts. In the next part, I'll talk a little about tips related to grease pencil. And what's most interesting, I'll also answer a subscriber's question.